This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. In the early morning hours of June 7th, 1992, 3 women disappeared. 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, 19-year-old Suzanne Streeter, and 18-year-old Stacy McCall were all believed to have been at Cheryl's home, along the 1700 block of East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri, at some point that morning. But sometime after Suzanne and Stacy arrived at the home, just after 2:30 a.m., all 3 would disappear without a trace. In the days and weeks that followed, the family members, friends, and other loved ones of the 3 missing women suffered tremendously, but perhaps none more so than Stacy McCall's parents, Stuart and Janice, with Stuart telling reporters with the Springfield News Leader, "What am I going to do if I have to go identify the body? You have to put it out of your mind and say it's not going to happen. It's just a big mind game you play with yourself." As the grim uncertainty of their daughter's fate continued to play out, the McCalls and others would have to deal with the burden that often plagues the loved ones of missing people. They had to not only deal with the severity of the loss, in their case that of their youngest child, but also the unnerving unknowing that came with that, not knowing where Stacy was, or if she was even still alive.
When I think back on a year ago, on the 7th, then I think about the terror of that night. You know, you relive it every time you think about it.
The sleepless nights as they were then are not as sleepless as they were, although different times during the day. It's really odd how memories of Stacy here with us crop into your mind at the oddest times during a workday.
I fixed fish tonight, you know, and the favorite kind that Stacy likes with the tartar sauce that she likes. And so, you know, I haven't fixed that fish in probably close to a year. Just because I didn't want to buy it again. You know, I didn't want to have it here because that was her meal. You know, she liked that. Everything that we do centers around that. We think about her all the time.
Part 2, 92-40169.
Oh, you lay down and you hear a car drive down the street, so you think, oh, that might be her. So you jump up and look out, or you think, gosh, what's she doing right now? Has she eaten? So when you try to eat something and it gets stuck in your throat, it didn't go very far.
Janice and Stuart McCall can't sleep or eat. Today was one of waiting by the phone, going to the police station, and this afternoon putting up posters around town, hoping that something will break the vacuum of not knowing.
I feel like I'm in a bad dream. I want to pinch myself and wake myself up, but I'm not asleep. I saw her graduate Saturday night. We were there, and now she's gone. We don't know where.
While the McCalls struggled to work through their grief, others close to the Springfield 3 continued to work through their own emotions, not knowing where to expend energy. Many tried to join in on the local search efforts in some way, putting up flyers, assisting in searches of local areas, etc., while others just didn't know how to help without feeling like they were getting in the way. Some felt like they just wanted to let the police do their job and help out only if they were called upon to do so. Sadly, Cheryl Levitt and Susie Streeter had been both of each other's biggest advocates, so them disappearing at the same time made it hard for anyone in the region to speak for them. However, they did have family that would speak to the press on occasion, including Cheryl's uncle, Cliff Williams, who lived in nearby Webster County, as well as her son and Susie's brother, Bart Streeter. Bart, 27 years old at the time, hadn't spoken with his mother or sister in a few months. However, he would soon find himself in the middle of the story, as police set out to uncover what his relationship was with 2 of the 3 missing women. As the closest familial connection either of them had in the Springfield area, he undoubtedly found himself high up on the suspect list early on, especially once police learned that he had grown estranged from them months beforehand. Bart Streeter was interviewed by investigators multiple times over, and, like many of the early suspects, was polygraphed. However, police officials refrained from calling him a suspect, describing him as cooperative many times over. Bart himself would state that he had nothing to hide, and reportedly sat with police through multiple interviews, even voluntarily dropping by police headquarters to chat with investigators about the status of the investigation. Months later, though, the pressure of the high-profile investigation seems to have gotten to Bart Streeter. He reportedly quit his job and moved out of town. Years later, he would get into some legal trouble for a number of reasons, but that's something we'll touch upon later on. Surprisingly, as police dug into the backstory of Bart Streeter and what led to him growing estranged from his immediate family, they learned more about one of Susie's boyfriends, who also became an early suspect. Susie's relationship with this young man had led to Bart voicing his disapproval, which led to him having multiple arguments with his mother and sister, ultimately losing touch with them for months before their eventual disappearance in June of 1992. Mike Kovacs was a young man that had dated Susie for a couple of years, up until September of the year prior, 1991. During their relationship, both Mike and Susie were reportedly abusive with one another, with Kovacs admitting that he and Susie would both hit each other quite a bit, citing their immaturity as a rationale. Despite that, though, the two had dated for 2 whole years, and actually lived together for a brief period of time the summer before Susie's disappearance, but their relationship had ended rather explosively later that fall, in September of 1991. As it turned out, Susie had sought a restraining order against Mike Kovacs roughly 7 months before her disappearance, on October 23, 1991. In a sworn statement, Susie claimed that Kovacs was abusive towards her, and had expressed multiple signs of troubling behavior such as slashing her car tires, threatening her via telephone, and harassing her at school, work, and home. For that reason, a 10-day restraining order was granted on October 23rd, but at a hearing to extend it beyond November 5th, Susie was a no-show, so the protection order expired. When asked by reporters about Mike Kovacs being a suspect, police told the Springfield News Leader, "Now you know why he was one of the first people we interviewed and began doing background checks on. We have 4 or 5 people we are looking at very closely. These are people who have non-substantiated alibis for breaks in time during the time we believe the women disappeared. Mr. Kovacs is one of these individuals." While Mike Kovacs was suspected of potential involvement early on, it's believed that the investigation quickly ruled him out as a suspect due to his relationship with Susie seeming to have been a thing of the past, and their explosive breakup happening nearly an entire year beforehand. They doubted that he would have sought revenge this late, yet that did not stop police from looking into him as a possibility early on. As days began to turn into weeks, the investigation into the disappearance of the 3 women seemed to stall. Yet the case remained front-page news for all of the local newspapers, and dominated coverage on the evening news in the region surrounding Springfield, Missouri. It was reported that investigators had looked through all of the various alleged leads that they had been given, such as allegations of Stacy and Susie getting wrapped up in drug use the night of their graduation, of which no evidence was ever found, as well as Cheryl Levitt living beyond her means, going into debt to finance her house renovations, which again, no evidence was ever found. As I touched on in the last episode, Cheryl's divorces had also been amicable, and she did not seem to have any evil exes that wanted to do her harm. So for that reason, solid, tangible leads were hard to come by for investigators. Roughly a week and a half after the Springfield 3 vanished into thin air, police in Springfield would release a composite image of a transient-type man seen near Cheryl's home on June 5th and again on June 6th, the days immediately preceding their disappearance. This individual was described as being between 34 and 48 years old, standing around 5 feet 8 or 5 feet 9 inches tall, having a thin frame, estimated to weigh around 145 pounds, with shoulder-length hair that was sandy or reddish in color, a freckled and tan complexion, a full-looking beard, and what looked like thin, almost drowsy-looking eyes. With the release of this composite image, Police Captain Tony Glenn stated, "This individual was totally out of place in the area. He was a transient type with no apparent reason for being there. it's something we feel is significant. A woman that lived 4 blocks away from Cheryl's home told police that she had seen a similar man on June 6th at her home, along with another man wearing a fluorescent orange vest. This woman claims that the 2 men knocked on her front door and she did not answer, but then they came around to the back sliding patio door, reportedly trying to open it, but abandoning their effort after just a few minutes.
2 days before the disappearance, the man was seen in the morning and then later in the afternoon at the corner of Glenstone and Delmar, less than a block east of Cheryl Levitt's home. And just a day before the disappearance, he was seen in this grassy field at Kentwood and Delmar, west of the house.
It's an individual will need to be able to account for, identify, and obtain information from as to why he may have been into the neighborhood.
Just suspicious for him being there for no reason?
As described to us, there was no good reason for him to be in the neighborhoods during the 3 times that he was actually sighted.
Just trying to circulate it and get it out there, and if anyone has any information, maybe they'll contact us and we can work it out from there.
At around the same time, investigators released the description and composite image of this man they described as a transient type. They also released a description of a vehicle seen at a Signal gas station located on the northeast corner of East Grant Street and South Glenstone Avenue, roughly 1/4 of a mile away from 1717 East Delmar Street, at around 4:30 a.m. on June 7th. The vehicle was described as a dark brown 2-door American-made vehicle, similar to an Oldsmobile, which was occupied by 2 men at the time. Police had also received reports of a brown Dodge van seen near Cheryl's home on the morning of June 7th, which was described as a 1967 to 1970 Dodge van with a rusted bottom and no rear or side windows. This van had reportedly been spotted at a nearby dentist office on June 3rd and June 4th, but had not been seen by any residents since the morning of June 7th, 1992. Later, police would amend their description of this van to be green or grayish in color, not brown, but that's something we'll touch upon later in the episode. Reporters would also highlight reports of a potential prowler seen roughly 3 blocks away from Cheryl's home the same morning that they had gone missing. A woman there claims that she saw a tall, thin man with a baseball cap peering into her window at around 1:15 a.m. on June 7th, before she turned on the lights and watched the man flee. Later, she claims, a neighbor found broken plants under that same window, as well as a pocket knife, which was handed over to police days later on June 9th. Later that month, it was reported that a gas station employee may have seen Cheryl Levitt at around 2:15 a.m. on June 7th, 1992, at around the same time that Stacy and Susie left Janelle Kirby's. Steve Thompson, a 24-year-old employee at the Apco A-Mart about 4.5 miles south of Cheryl Levitt's home, claims that he saw a woman that looked incredibly similar to Cheryl after 2 o'clock that morning. This was in an area where Cheryl and Susie had lived just months beforehand, before moving to their new home on East Delmar Street, and where they still spent a lot of time in, so they were regulars in the neighborhood.
Stuck her head in, she asked if I had seen 3 girls. And I said, hold on just a second, and I finished taking the money from the customer, and then I walked around the counter to the door, and she asked if I had seen Susie, a brunette girl, and another blonde girl in the last hour and a half to 2 hours. To me, she wasn't upset. She was maybe hyper, she was in a hurry, obviously. I just assumed as a concerned parent.
Thompson thinks Levitt's daughter, Susie Streeter, was in the store that night a few hours earlier.
Susie and Stacy and another girl that I don't recall ever seeing were in there earlier in the evening. I'm not sure on the time. It could be anywhere from 10 to 11, 11:30, somewhere in between there.
They buy something?
They came in and each bought like gum, candy, and then there's a guy that was with Stacy, and he stuck his head in and said he had forgotten to buy cigarettes, and Susie then purchased some Marlboro Lights for him.
Police, who just yesterday said they were fairly confident of Thompson's information, today hedged somewhat that it was Cheryl Levitt out that night.
We're still looking into that. That's one of the key things we want to do is to find out why this conflicting information is there and put it to rest once and for all as to what actually occurred.
Thompson says he's sure it was Levitt. Police just hope someone comes forward to confirm a vital piece of information. In Springfield, Scott Boyd, Cullerton Newsbeat.
While it was hard for police to make heads or tails of this witness report, it would open up the possibility that Cheryl may have left her home early on the morning of June 7th to look for Susie at around the same time Susie and Stacy had been driving home from Janelle Kirby's home in Battlefield. It would also indicate that Susie and Stacy may have been at the gas station earlier that evening, at around the same time they were headed over to a party in Springfield. That party took place at friend Michelle Elder's home along East Hanover Street, roughly 1 mile away from the gas station, and this information may have given police belief that the witness sighting was credible. This was likely information that others like Janelle Kirby, as well as some other friends of Susie and Stacy's, could verify. Yet, the main component of Steve Thompson's witness report that police would struggle to verify was the belief that Cheryl Levitt had been out looking for Susie late that evening. As far as they had gathered, this was the only single report that she had been attempting to locate Susie, since by all indications, Cheryl had believed Susie would be staying with friends at a hotel in Branson, Missouri that evening. None of Susie's friends or their families would recall getting a phone call from Cheryl that night, looking for Susie. Kathy Kirby, Janelle Kirby's mother, told the Springfield News Leader, "If she wanted to get a hold of her daughter, she knew exactly where to call. Our phone did not ring one time. I don't want to call anybody a liar, but to me it's just very strange that she did not call us, when we had told her to call us if she needed to get a hold of Susie." Mary Keller, a close friend of Cheryl's, would also express doubt about this alleged sighting. For her to be out at 2 in the morning just whistling in the wind or whatever, that's just nuts. The only way she would go out like that is if somebody called her and said Susie needed her. Yet, despite that, authorities would state that Steve Thompson's information had some veracity to it, with Captain Tony Glenn telling reporters, "Everything he has told us that can be verified has been verified." Thompson's account would undoubtedly shake up the potential timeline for events quite a bit, and put into question what may have happened inside or outside of Cheryl's home in the early morning hours of June 7th, 1992. However, weeks later, police seem to have stepped away from Thompson's testimony, believing that this may have just been a case of mistaken identity. They never really touched upon what led them to the sudden change in belief. Later that month, another potential witness would come forward. A waitress at George's Steakhouse, a 24/7 diner located along South Glenstone Avenue, claims that she saw 3 women there on the morning of June 7th, at some point between 1 and 3 a.m. It was believed that there was a mother and daughter, identical in appearance to Cheryl Levitt and Susie Streeter, and that they were there with a younger brunette woman, possibly Stacy McCall. The waitress claims that the younger blonde woman, supposedly Susie, was visibly intoxicated and was acting giddy, and that the older woman, presumably Cheryl Levitt, was trying to calm her down. The third woman, possibly Stacy McCall, remained quiet throughout their time there. This would push back the known timeline a bit longer, and would indicate that someone may have followed the 3 women home from the diner. But as was the case with the potential gas station sightings, it was impossible to determine whether or not this was a true accounting of the Springfield 3, or just women that looked like them, or whether this was a sighting that was just being conflated with another in the memory of someone recounting events days, maybe weeks after the fact. We'll be right back after a short break. Surprisingly, Mike Kovacs was not the only ex-boyfriend of Susie Streeter's to be suspected of involvement early on. Another, Dustin Reckla, found himself in investigators' crosshairs within the early weeks of the case, due to not only his volatile relationship with Susie, but other criminal acts he was purported to have engaged in. Because of those, the suspicion around him would linger for months. 20-year-old Dustin Reckla's prior criminal history put him on police radar in the first place, with him having been accused of helping break into a mausoleum that prior February. Reckla and 2 of his cohorts, Joseph Rydell and Michael Clay, broke into a mausoleum at Springfield's Maple Park Cemetery, damaging 2 coffins in the process of stealing gold fillings from the teeth of corpses. Later, they had pawned off the gold fillings for $30 at a pawn shop in Springfield. As a result, all had been charged with felony institutional vandalism, with Rydell having fled to Illinois afterward. Clay jumped bail and fled to California. Based on the testimony of all 3, Reckla's involvement in the grave robbing heist had been rather minimal. He'd remained outside the mausoleum while Clay and Rydell broke into it, stealing the head of 2 bodies inside, one of which they set on fire. The second of which they had removed the gold fillings from before leaving it in a tree in Jenny Lincoln Park, where it was discovered days later by a pair of young boys playing. At the time of the grave robbing incident, February of 1992, Dustin and Susie had only been dating for a brief period. If you recall, she had broken up with Mike Kovacs the prior September. However, Susie had been questioned by investigators about the vandalism of corpses, and reportedly provided them with a statement regarding Dustin Reckla's involvement in the felony. Months later, investigators would theorize that this testimony, some of the only evidence against Reckla and his cohorts, may have provided a motive for her to have been targeted by the group. It was also believed that Cheryl Levitt had testified against Reckla too, theorizing that he had used her car to help carry out the crime. Police would later learn that Dustin Reckla and his associates were in Springfield on June 7th, the same time that Susie disappeared along with her mom and friend. Worried that the grave-robbing trio may have had something to do with the missing 3 women, police surveilled Reckla and his accomplices in the days that followed. However, it's unknown if any suspicious behavior was witnessed by police during this span. In the months that followed, police would continue to look into Dustin Reckla as a potential suspect. A known drug user, Reckla was also linked to a local MC, the Galloping Goose Motorcycle Club, and police struggled to find anything that eliminated him as a possible abductor of the 3 women. But, similarly, they struggled to find anything definitive connecting him to the disappearance, and months later he was sentenced to a 3-year suspended sentence for the grave robbing incident from February of 1992. This came with a number of stipulations, such as being placed in a community sentencing program and spending 14 days in county jail, as well as serving 150 hours of community service and paying restitution to the cemetery. But overall, it was a pretty light sentence. So much so that it's hard to believe Reckla and his associates would have murdered 3 women to avoid it. As weeks began to transform into months, nothing new seemed to develop. Authorities kept pushing for any of the hundreds, nay, thousands of tips they had received thus far to turn into solid leads, but they, along with the missing trio's family and friends, remained disappointed. Despite that, however, they remained consistent in their belief that someone from the area had been involved, either in the disappearance itself or simply knew of it, yet was refusing to talk. On December 31st, 1992, a call came into the switchboard of America's Most Wanted, with the caller offering up information about the disappearance of the 3 women. This information was apparently specific enough to get the attention of investigators, with Springfield Police Sergeant David Asher later stating, "We were able to corroborate some of the information he provided as a result of our investigation. There was a motive mentioned, and with the information provided, it's conceivable the crime occurred that way." However, during the call taker mistakenly tried to loop in police, resulting in the call being dropped without the caller's information being written down. Afterward, police and family members of the missing women would make public appeals for the caller to get back in touch with police, as investigators believed their information to have been incredibly useful. It's believed that this caller indicated stalking as a potential precursor to the crime, and hinted at a link to the Jacksonville, Florida region. Taped appeals for this caller to get in touch with them would air on America's Most Wanted through 1993, but it's unknown if this caller ever re-established contact. Throughout 1993, the women failed to materialize in any way, missing their birthdays. First came Susie's birthday in March, and then Stacy's in April. Then finally Cheryl's in November, the second birthday she had missed since the initial disappearance. On the 1-year mark of the case, dubbed 92-40169 in local police records, it was still heavily talked about amongst locals, who wondered what made this case so unsolvable. When asked why police still did not know where the 3 missing women were, the lead investigator, Sergeant Asher, told reporters with the Springfield News Leader, "It's an unreasonable question. We don't know why because we don't have a crime scene. We haven't found the women. We haven't got a clue that we're aware of that's led us in a specific direction." Later that month, the reward for answers rose to nearly $100,000, but still failed to lead to any resolution. In 1993, a prisoner led investigators to a farm in western Webster County, where he claimed the bodies of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy would be found. However, an extensive search of the region turned up nothing new. Like the other tips, this had been a dead end, but the prisoner that led police to this farm would remain in their crosshairs for a while longer, due if only to his forced involvement in the story. This prisoner was awaiting sentencing for an unrelated weapons violation in Greene County at the time, and told police that a friend had confessed to killing the missing 3 women whilst drinking. This prisoner then gave police the reported location where they could find the women's bodies as well as the van used to transport their bodies, leading to the search in 1993. Surprisingly, that location had a tie to a separate crime from 1990. In that incident, 3 other Springfield residents had also disappeared at the same time. 35-year-old Mary Susan Thomas, 34-year-old John David Davison, and 40-year-old Daniel Lee Davison. The victims were believed to have been killed in a drug deal gone wrong, and information had led police to that same stretch of land in 1990, 3 years earlier, where they had heard that 2 out of the 3 bodies had been disposed of. But after a similar search back then, nothing had been found. Yet the property's owner, Francis Lee Robb Sr., later pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. Regarding the search of the property in 1993, police remained mum about what potential evidence, if at all, they had discovered. Barred by a partial gag order from revealing anything found during the search, police would reveal that this was just the second of 3 searches they had conducted in that area during this time, all of which pertained to the still unsolved Springfield 3 investigation. Despite the search warrants being sealed by a Webster County court, Springfield Police Captain Todd Whitson would reveal, "It was not just routine, we have a substantial interest in this." The inmate that led police to this location later pleaded guilty to 2 counts of unlawful possession of a concealable weapon, and was sentenced in November of 1993 to 2 years in prison. Despite it being reported that police had found nothing substantial during their searches, investigators speculated that this inmate knew more about the case than he had let on, as he had provided information that was not known to the general public. We'll hear more about this individual in the next episode. In response to the search in 1993, family members and friends continued to struggle with the cynicism that seemed to be winning them over, with Cheryl Levitt's uncle, Cliff Williams, telling reporters, "I'm beginning to think they're probably at the bottom of a lake somewhere. If they were alive, I'm sure surely by now somehow they would have contacted us." Janice McCall, the mother of Stacy McCall, told the Springfield News Leader, "I'm glad they searched. I'm glad they came up with nothing, because I still think they're alive. I'm sick of the negative comments that they're not alive. I don't believe they're dead and buried." From the earliest days of the investigation, police had tried to highlight a van that had been spotted in the area near Cheryl Levitt's home, which was believed to have been brown in color. But over time, police would amend that statement, claiming that it may have been gray-green in color. However this discrepancy came to be, I couldn't tell you. Regardless, this van was reportedly spotted near Cheryl's home in the vital time period that the 3 women were believed to have gone missing, sometime between 2:30 and 7:30 a.m. on June 7th. Well, in October of 1993, more than a year later, police discovered a similar-looking van at a public campground in Indiana, having been abandoned there by a couple weeks beforehand. The couple reportedly stayed at the campsite that summer, having also driven a pickup truck, leaving behind the van at the RV park in Ripley County, Indiana when they left. Eventually, police were called to take care of the matter, and discovered that the van, which had no license plates at the time, had been stolen from Springfield, Missouri the same week that the Springfield 3 had gone missing. Was this a coincidence? Maybe it was, as police believe the dark blue 1985 Dodge conversion van had no relation to their case, other than the similar time frame in which it had been stolen. This is despite it having been stolen from the 1500 block of North Glenstone Avenue, just 2.5 miles away from Cheryl Levitt's home, sometime between June 4th and 9th, 1992. After the discovery of this van, police would insist upon their interest in looking for a 1960s metallic green Dodge van, which more closely resembled the vehicle seen near the potential crime scene. In August of 1994, a Greene County grand jury was impaneled to explore the disappearance, re-examining the relationships between the primary suspects and the victims, as well as some other theories posited by investigators. One of the suspects that police began re-examining was Dustin Reckla, the ex-boyfriend of Suzanne Streeter, who, along with his cohorts, Joseph Rydell and Michael Clay, had been probed for potential involvement back in 1992. When asked about the grand jury by reporters, Dustin Reckla would tell them, "It's the same stuff. Nothing new for the past 2 years and some months." Sadly, he was not the only one to make that same complaint. The investigation overseen by police, which was more than 2 years old at this point, had been struggling to make any real progress in quite some time, and by all indications, had long since stagnated. While police had received thousands of tips from all over the country at this point, it seems like the massive influx of potential information led to a tsunami of speculation, with police struggling to determine which tip may grow into a lead. Now, a couple of years out from the mystifying disappearance of 3 women from Springfield, Missouri, they were just as lost as they had ever been. At this point, the investigation would begin to enter the most dreaded phase of an investigation. The one that family members and other loved ones loathe to hear, because it almost undoubtedly implies that there is nowhere else for the case to go. That the leads, however many, have resulted in nothing but dead ends. A cold case investigation. That's on the next episode of Unresolved. Before we go, while digging into the newspaper archives for this story, I found a letter to the editor written by Janelle Kirby, friend of Susie and Stacy's, and one of the last people to see them. For many months, the Springfield News Leader had included daily pictures of the 3 missing women in their paper, counting each day that they had been missing. However, partway through 1993, this feature was dropped, with the victims' family members and other loved ones voicing their disapproval. They still held out hope that the women would return home safely, and the paper losing hope in them seemed to cast doubt upon that hopeful goal. In this letter to the editor, Janelle Kirby wrote, "I find it hard to believe you are no longer posting the days and pictures of Susie Streeter, Stacy McCall, and Cheryl Levitt in the newspaper. You are the only way we could keep this in the public eye from day to day. It seems like you have given up on their coming home. I strongly believe in my heart that my 2 best friends, who I miss very deeply, will come home. All that we have left to hold on to is hope, and you are taking part of that away by removing their pictures from the newspaper. I want you to put yourself in my position. Would you want people to give up hope and quit praying for their return? With their pictures in the paper, maybe someone will see it, know something, and come forward. By you taking them out of the paper, we cannot pray for that. Springfield needs to always remember and pray along with us for their safe return."